Diseases are some of my favorite things to study and work on. At least they were prior to the creation of this YouTube channel, because man, I miss the lab from time to time. These microorganisms in some cases, but also viruses, depending also on which biologist you ask, are not even living, exist on this planet to flourish, and in some ways they can use many parts of the human body to do so. Whether it be E. coli flourishing in our intestines, which, when I worked in enterics, for some reason, ages 18 to 35, had a statistically impossible growth in contracting E. coli-based illnesses through self-reported normal means. We know what you're doing. Stop that. Or perhaps it's rabies, which flourishes within our central nervous system, ultimately taking us out and destroying the person we once were. The one thing that is fascinating is how the human body does or does not compensate when exposed to an illness, perhaps one that it's never run across before. In the events of The Cured, we are on the tail end of an outbreak of the maize virus. This virus ransacked all of Europe, with most of the population eventually contracting this illness. Thrown into a deep state of psychosis, humans would become ravenous towards one another as people began to be eaten in the streets, and this fast-acting virus almost immediately began affecting their emotional control as well as their physiological autonomous functions. As the virus was eventually overcome, it became apparent that those who were infected could be cured, but sometimes it seems like the cure would be worse than the disease. As the cured would begin to be reintegrated into society, it would create an issue for those who remember what the cured had done, and the cured themselves having nightmares and flashbacks to the atrocities they committed while turned. As work continued to rid everyone of the maize virus, it would almost become apparent that the cure only worked with a 75% efficacy rate. So the question to all this is, what is the virus, what is its pathophysiology associated with infection, and how might the cure actually work? Let's discuss that in today's episode. We kick off our story today fresh off a copyright hit from Warner Brothers over my Deep Blue Sea episode, which severely affected this channel's reach. So as per usual, if you're seeing this, congratulations, I love you. Seeing as this is a film from Ireland, this also means I'm probably going to be hit by Korea Telecom. They'll be beating down my door claiming rights to this movie in about 4 seconds, so enjoy. Don't ask me how it works. It's all very confusing, but more hilarious, it's also very illegal. So we get a heads up now. The maize virus has been spreading all over Europe. Much like the French, this causes a violent psychosis to be induced in those afflicted. Through the loss of theoretically millions at this point, they were able to contain it much like how France contains French. The virus, however, obliterated Ireland, and even with the cure found for the disease, only 75% of cases are actually successfully cured, or at least they're stemmed, because I don't believe they're actually cured. Even then, though, there may be lingering unwanted effects and abilities that are not fully understood by the doctors and scientists who were able to bring back the infected into the land of humanity. Also, everyone who was infected can remember everything they did, which is highly interesting as this suggests the cerebrum is intact. However, other areas of the brain were able to override this functioning, or at least had their functioning so degraded they couldn't even control anything, which is going to be interesting to talk about here in a moment. So the question from here is, how do you reintegrate those 75% who would have massive levels of PTSD given they remember everything that they were doing, and what are you supposed to do with the 25% who are still resistant to the cure? Accompanying that, other bloodborne diseases still absolutely exist, so you know someone somewhere contracted something apart from just the maize virus during their travels as a human garbage disposal pit. Given human thinking, there's nothing good that's going to come out of this. So let's find out what is going on. As a man breathes heavily, strawberry jam can be seen all over his foot. He's actually hyperventilating, which implies the metabolic load may be high, but it more likely implies that the parasympathetic nervous system could be having issues regulating the body, or even that cerebral vasoconstriction is currently being experienced. If this is the case, the brain would be almost starving for oxygen due to the decreased blood flow into the brain through like the arteries and such, which in turn would cause a person's body to panic as the organ that regulates lots of functions is reporting less oxygen than normal. This would indicate that this is a nervous system disease through and through, but specifically the brainstem, frontal lobe, limbic system to some degree, and the blood vessels of the brain would be most affected by this disease. With later what we will see, considering how fast acting it is, it almost appears as though a toxin is at play within the brain, disrupting function in some areas, with other areas appearing to be okay. Given that there is no disruption to memory formation, this indicates some areas of the limbic system are functional in their standard processing to a degree, as mentioned, but other areas of the brain are not faring as well. And what we will learn about the cure, it appears as though the maize virus has a neurodegenerative effect. As he checks his eye, there is a ring of broken blood vessels. I would have to think, considering this is how they check to see who's been cured and who hasn't, or who never even contracted the disease in the first place, there must have been some sort of infection maybe in this area, but likely the reasoning behind this thinking is actually pretty clever. With the hypothesized vasoconstriction of the brain, the medicine used to cure the infected would have difficulty entering the brain to a degree if it needed to. By entering through the orbital socket, this cure that was created would travel back through the optic nerve, which runs into the brain near the lower portions, which appears to be the most affected areas. In doing so, the cure would be able to enter the brain through the eyes, but this would require a person sticking a needle in their eye, leaving this permanent scar on the tissue. So these are Irish names, and I'm going to try to pronounce them correctly, unlike Sealbon, which apparently was Siobhan in that one episode. Our main man Shannon sits down with Connor. Shannon has the 1,000-yard stare, which is always a good indication that things are going great, and he's having no internal turmoil whatsoever. Connor tells Shannon that it's all going to go back to normal and everything's going to be alright. Not if human prejudices have anything to say about it. They interview Shannon, where we see this whole thing is like totally screwed to the wall. They ask if he has any violent outbursts, sense of aggression, is he hungry for brains, all the greatest hits. They then ask if he has had nightmares, which he says yes. The general here, or whatever he is, says good, it's for all the suffering you caused. Brother, what? Full stop. This is like being angry at a dog for being hungry. There are turbo douches out there that would be, but this disease wasn't a choice, and what followed wasn't the individual's wants or needs either. Oh yeah, it's gonna be one of those where Roanoke complains about the general vibe of the movie. Is the general actually Amy? Maybe. It's kind of confusing at first. He kind of acts like her, but in the end, he doesn't. And also, if you've ever wondered why I talk about Amy being the worst thing imaginable on this channel, look no further than the Ruins episode I covered. You should go watch it. If you don't go in on Amy after that, there's something wrong with you. So Shannon from here is given the general rundown. He's told to report to work every week. He's being released to go and actually work to be an aide for a doctor who is actually working on the resistance cure, but his sister-in-law is going to take him in. Apparently, if you were infected, you're now a second-class citizen at this point because, it was totally your fault and everything. We should definitely focus our ire on the person and not the disease where it came from. Brilliant. So the news everyone is talking about, integration process, and they're upset about it. There are riots and people throwing stuff as their loved ones were eaten, and they're just scared. Ah, humanity, don't ever change. Shannon and Connor now hug it out as he tells him not to tell her. Very good. This group is a part of the third wave, with the first two waves of integration not going over so hot, with the cured kind of taking themselves out in alarming rates because, again, they have PTSD. The news talks about 25% being resistant to the cure, and now we meet Abby. As Shannon meets Abby, they talk about how everything sucks, and technically it was Shannon's house prior. Shannon's job is at the treatment center, and he will be working with the resistant, which I'm not gonna lie, if I was infected and cured, this would be completely baller of a job. After all, that one guy is just a cleaner. That said, the memories of the people that I have eaten, maybe not so baller. So Killian now comes over to say hey to his uncle as he asks if he was cured. He talks about his sickness and then asks if it will come back. Probably won't. Then again, when you have the chicken pox, it comes back as the shingles, so who knows. That night, we get a flashback to what happened to Shannon. He was jumped as his brother went to go check on his missing son Killian, and Shannon ended up turning at this point quite rapidly. The next morning, Connor goes to see his old man. Standing there like a complete weirdo, no joke, this dude acts like he's still infected half the time. He's a cleaner, but prior he was running for election. He wants to return back to the courtroom, and his dad basically tells him, "Go pound sand, you ate my wife." Truly, a Chris Chan moment.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
That was gross.
You don't say!
Why did I write that? You know what? We're doing it live. It stays in because what in the name of all that is holy is happening on this rock? So his dad drives off, leaving Connor all on his lonesome. Meanwhile, Shannon then bikes to work with blood still in the walls behind him. You think rain or a hose would have gotten that off, but as he checks in, he heads towards work and approaches a requisitioned pool with one of the resistant in it. It doesn't react to him, but reacts to the doctor entering the room. As she thrashes around, Shannon holds her down as the doctor injects something in her, causing her to not become as aggressive but to start crying, indicating once more she's in there but overcome by the psychosis. So before moving on, we need to establish the most basic symptom associated with this infection, as a person's symptoms and behavioral shift later will be more easily understood. Psychosis in its most basic form has many different causes, whether that be genetic, environmental, or chemical. When you hear psychosis, people tend to think of schizophrenia, which is characterized by the enlargement of the ventricles in the brain. It has been observed that these ventricles will expand to around 130% their normal size, which is indicative of this issue. It's not funny, it's just I keep stumbling over words, and yeah, it's annoying. So this typically is because of thalamic shrinkage in the medial nuclei of the brain, as well as the adjacent striatum and insular cortex. What does that mean? In layman's terms, neuronal tissue death in the areas that seems to be associated with higher than normal levels of dopamine, amongst other chemicals. The chemicals that control thinking, behavior, and emotions appear to either be too active or not active enough, which in turn causes an issue to develop. Because remember, neurochemicals essentially activate or don't activate depending on how many there are. So if you have too much, you have too much activation. If you don't have enough, you have too little activation. This is another impact on the brain seen in those with psychosis as well. The brain existing in this environment will lose tissue over time, which is our favorite ailment, brain damage. It is known that if a person is in a state of psychosis for too long, the longer they exist in it, the more damage to the brain. And that's why it's important to pull them out of it as fast as possible with the use of medications and support. There is recovery after psychosis. And also, fun fact, this is going to make a lot of people angry, but smoking the MJ can induce a state of psychosis that is actually long-lasting. It appears that some people, it can actually trigger their schizophrenia if it's in their genetics, even if normally it wouldn't have happened. That's right, the icky sticky is not 100% safe. Don't let anybody tell you that it is. That's because they're just really dependent on it. And they're probably not even listening to me now. They're probably just writing a hate comment. I'm just passing along information. Anyhow, with the infected, we see this state of psychosis as quite complex and long-lived. They appear to be in a constant state of it. This would mean that the longer a person is infected and their brain patterns are disorganized, the more damage to their brains they are being subjected to. This would also mean that the cure would be reliant on rebuilding neuronal tissue, which also would be a tremendous medical breakthrough for our society, essentially forcing neuroplasticity and neuronal mitosis, but we'll get more into this later. But with the infected in particular, it seems that when they are attacked, this deep psychosis causes them to behave violently, likely through hallucinations and emotional control being off the table. This will cause them to attack friends and family that they were just with, but there are other interesting symptoms that seem to harken back to a more primitive human mind and may even suggest other things about the human brain. Shannon asks why she didn't react to him, which the doctor also references chickenpox. You can't be infected a second time. But I think smallpox would have been a better example given the horrific issues with this infection. So the resistant still think the cured are one of them. Another interesting point here is that is human immunity and scent at play here? Upon being infected with the maize virus, the infected can immediately differentiate from one another. This more than likely would have to do with your smell, potentially. When an animal is dealing with an infection of sorts, the activity of macrophages in the body will actually produce a scent that can be picked up by other animals. In some ways, this is a survival technique passed down through generations as it was successful. Animals, in some instances, will not eat sick animals because they themselves do not want to get sick. Now, take that with a grain of salt because a lot of animals will actually go after the sick and weaker animals, but if a disease is bad enough, the scent of the internal battle going on will keep away predators. Should the animal survive this encounter and then overcome the infection later, they would be able to pass along their genes. With this line of thought, it may help to explain why sometimes when someone is sick at work or in your house, you can smell the changes in the environment and it gives you a pretty clear indicator to keep your distance, and the same may be for the infected. When a person is infected, their body would immediately launch into open confrontation with the innate immunities going after the virus. Likely destroying some of the virus, the body would, I believe, ultimately be the victor in this outcome, but there would be lingering issues. This is what I love about this movie, actually, is the portrayal of the disease and what happens after the fact. It's not just some mystery illness that continues to somehow sap your body, which, let's be real, under normal circumstances, this would result in your end as your body becomes more and more depleted, trying to deal with the invader. Like 28 days later, I'm sorry, if you are that depleted, you're just gonna drop. You're not gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna hang out for like 9 days with no food or water. Like, not only is the immune system struggling and all of your biological processes struggling, but because of that, you would drop. Like it's this one, however, it makes a little bit more sense. Anyhow, so instead, this virus hits fast and hard, leaving you in a permanent state of psychosis and an instinctual drive to eat. However, from what we will see later, your immune system cares very little for the response of just the brain in some capacity and will continue its campaign against the virus to its completion. The adaptive immune system is rarely defeated in the parking lot. Anyhow, this scent produced is likely something that the non-infected can't smell on the completely infected or the cured, but then again, the human nose is really not that finely tuned of an organ. We are really more visual predators, which is why eyesight is dedicated to an entire lobe of our brain, specifically the occipital lobe, whereas our sense of smell is simply a bulb, the olfactory bulb to be exact. As a person is cured, it's likely the operation of their immune system may have to remain at low level function to deal with a constant presence of the virus. Because of the constant scent production, this would indicate that to some degree the virus, again, remains in the body, and the body must contend with it. Much like how you have chickenpox, right? It goes dormant, but it's still there. Or herpes, which can come back every once in a while because it's still there. Or really any chronic virus that never fully leaves your body, such as HIV. Your immune system is always ready to throw hands on sight, but it's still there. And because of this, the immune system would create low levels of this scent because it's constantly fighting it throughout your body, which the resistant can still pick up on. It's actually fairly interesting the indicators of infection you can glean from just a few symptoms, isn't it? The doctor, though, is allowed to keep caring for her patient and try to figure out a cure, but that'll be drawing to a close soon enough. As Abby goes to pick up her son, another parent is upsetty about her taking in an infected as Connor starts creepily following around Abby and her son. Meanwhile, Shannon shares a moment with the infected woman because it won't mess with them, and here we see the olfactory bulb picking up his scent, which causes an effect in the brain. Perhaps because of their infection status and the psychosis they have entered, the scent of the infected increases the activity in the brain, decreasing their psychotic state, allowing them to basically calm, whereas when a person is not infected, another molecule causes their brain to decrease in activity. It could be that this is the case, although the only issue I see with it is when the cured are with the non-cured, the resistant still become violent and try to attack. This may be because, again, while the cured cause neurons to enter an excitatory state, bringing the infected back up to at least somewhat normal baseline, non-infected may have a stronger impact on decreasing activity, causing the violence to increase. At this point, we have to assume this is a trait inspired by the virus itself in order to propagate itself through a population. Sort of like how a respiratory virus would want you to cough, which in theory should get the virus out of your airway, making you less infected, but this also allows for the virus to infect others. The virus wants a person to be calm around infected because remember, when you are in psychosis, you are actively experiencing brain damage, and because there's nothing to attack, there's no need to continue to have the brain damaged. But when a scent is detected that shows somebody is not infected, activity decreases in the brain via the olfactory bulb, influencing the area of the brain associated with emotional control, which then causes the person to be violent and attack the non-infected through erratic and just aggressive behavior. This spreads the sickness. So with that said, we hear over the radio, they are considering just straight up dropping the 25% who are resistant to the cure as no cure has been found in order to get them to join the ranks of humanity once more. While that's happening, Shannon goes to talk to Connor as he tells him the resistant still think the cured are them. Meanwhile, General Nonsense shows up to Connor to tell him, hey, stop skipping work. Again, he gets attacked because he's not feeling it, Mr. Krabs, and all I can think is, when you treat a group of people as less than, what is the typical outcome of that? People won't put up with that crap forever. So after the troops leave and the rest of the cured watch, Shannon then keeps having dreams about eating younglings. This is just straight up PTSD, which let's talk about memory formation. For all new people who just kind of stumbled across this content, which is unlikely given the fact that Warner Brothers is screwing this channel, I break into the summaries to drop biological science, like that's the whole basis of this channel. So I hope you enjoy it. Memory formation is a fairly complex process. When you experience something, the more horrific it is, the stronger the memory. Now, there is a point where your brain will see something so horrible that while it is permanently etched into your brain, it will protect itself by actively blocking that memory. But it's sort of like covering up an infection. It sits there and festers and comes out in life later. Ask me how I know this information. When neurons are activated in a particular order when the brain experiences an event, there are several areas of the brain that are activated, but the hippocampus and other structures near it and temporal lobe will basically be the big players here. This will help you remember an event and then store it for later retrieval. This activity is pretty much like blinking or breathing. While you can influence the blinking and breathing rate by thinking about it, much like how you are now manually breathing, the fact is it continues without you trying. And I just screwed myself up and now I'm manually breathing. This is how memories are formed and then stored. They will happen regardless of what you do, but you can increase the process, such as when you're learning in order to store information that you need for later because it's useful to your memories to be retrieved. So when a person is infected, while activity in their brain ceases or at least diminishes, their grasp on reality was also severely altered by being in a state of psychosis inducing disorganized thinking and aggression. Their brain was still forming memories though, and they will still be able to somewhat think. Because of this, we can assume that the cerebrum was still largely functional, while the operations of the brain itself were impacted in a very detrimental way. You can kind of think of it like a game of telephone, right? Sort of, I guess, with two people on one side of the phone talking to a third person on the other side of the phone. The two people on one side usually talk in unison, with this being like voluntary functional thought and then autonomous thought, with the third person listening what to do. Once infected though, the two people on one side of the phone that are trying to talk to the other person are no longer talking normal, and this is like your cerebrum with the other person, which is the autonomous functions, shrieking and speaking gibberish. The third person is listening to this, and communication will be near impossible, but actions would be carried out to the best of what it heard, and this would be the body and your actions. So this implies the lower functions of the brain, and it's lower simply because it's lower literally physically on your brain, are going to struggle to contend with the effects of the virus, but your cerebrum may still be functional and generating memories. But the question is, why exactly? Well, we'll cover that when we get a better look at the symptoms. The next morning, Shannon opens up the door to find his house has been marked that he's living there, which has to be a wonderful feeling. Abby now gets a heads up on the work call that the resistant are probably going to be dropping soon due to a government order, as Connor once again keeps chasing people like he's infected. Bro, for the love of God, act normal when you approach a lone woman at a park. Somehow though, he sits down with her, I'm not sure why she would do this, and at one point he says he worked in the courtroom but now he's a cleaner. Abby then asks what it was like to be infected. Well, I would have to assume it's sunshine and lollipops and rainbows and butterflies. As the experimentation continues on the resistant though, the doctor notes that nerve degradation remains the same, indicating that when the virus attacks, it damages nerves and destroys connections. Which also, let's talk about the neurology behind that for a moment. So, we have dipped into like a little bit of what this is, but I think this highlights just exactly what is happening and why it is so fast acting. Clearly, this is a neural disease. Is it rabies? Yeah, no, it's not rabies. It appears as though those who are infected will have their brain damaged, but the question is, why is their brain damaged? Well, I believe it's a two-pronged attack, maybe even three-pronged if you want to get technical. The first prong is what induces the hyperventilation. As the person is attacked, they will have the virus enter their bloodstream. Once it is there, it is clear the virus releases some form of toxin or itself is the toxin. If you're unaware, viruses can be toxic to the body, and it's usually because it's just a piece of the virus itself. This toxin would quickly move around the body using the circulatory system where it would begin to induce massive vasoconstriction. This vasoconstriction appears to be somewhat constant as those infected will have gray skin and difficulty moving. As oxygen is cut off from the dermal layer through this constriction, this will also begin cutting off blood supply to the brain. Now, the blood vessels are still moving blood around the body, just way less effectively. And this also skyrockets your blood pressure, probably giving everyone atherosclerosis or hardening of their blood vessels. And also, that's probably going to give them a shorter lifespan as a result. And if you have an undiagnosed aneurysm, you're probably donezo the second you get bit. But this oxygen deprivation would probably keep a person right at the door of being brain dead to a degree, and this shows. As the infection continues, some neurons will die, and this is noted by the doctor. With neuronal death comes a psychosis, and with that also comes the decreased ability to actually control yourself. Hallucinations, violent outbursts, aggression, and an altered view of reality can happen when you damage your brain just under normal means. So, to bring these people back, they would need to repair the brain. In 75% of those infected, they were able to accomplish this. However, in 25%, they remain resistant to this neural repairing medicine. But why? And I think I know, and we will get there in a moment. So meanwhile, at the cured group, two are talking about hitting a target. And see, again, you can't just casually degrade people. It just doesn't work, as it makes a person resistant to everything that you're trying to do overall, even if it's helpful. So as Shannon walks downstairs, he catches the two betas trying to get it on with an infected. Like, bro, okay, first, messed up for the obvious reasons, but second, you're talking about bodily fluids being the vector in which this virus is able to transmit to people. Why in the name of all that is holy would you try to hook up with somebody who is infected when their bodily fluids are contaminated? This part blew my mind. So the infected is then shot, making escape on her lunch, and the debate continues on about what to do with the resistant. Meanwhile, Connor meets with Shannon as he has a plan. They're going to hit some targets where allegedly there's nobody there. So nobody will get hurt, according to Connor, but that's just what they tell Shannon, because really, you're hitting a residential sector. How could there not be people there? So now the resistance of the cure starts. Known as the Cured Alliance, they take credit for the Molotov cocktails, which at this point causes even more issues for Shannon, as he's got more trauma. He now has flashbacks to when he was turned. It was Connor who turned him, as Shannon then attacked his brother. Connor is now also voted most likely to Molotov cocktail an apartment and becomes leader of the Cured Alliance. Back at work, Shannon discusses with the doctor about was was it worth curing everyone? She says they were ecstatic about finding the cure and that those who were infected weren't in control, they were just sick. Again, this is why you can't just seek retribution on people infected with a disease, more so if that disease is as described. As Shannon comes home, Abby questions him about where he was, with the Cured Alliance and all that, and she starts talking about how there was a cure and that she hoped Luke would have been able to have the cure, as she hadn't seen him in a while because she took their son Killian and then ran off. She realized, though, that when she was finally able to come home, the smell was a dead giveaway that maybe Luke was no longer around, but instead was just strips of beef jerky on the ground at that point. Going for a nice hike through the wilderness of Ireland, do those still exist out there? Figured everything would be pretty much populated at this point. They look out over a city and begin bonding. Bond with me, Jimmy, as they then have dinner that night. Oh, thank God, Connor's here to make it even more fun. Stop letting this rando in the house. So they have a nice chat, and Abby talks about how they're all in danger as Connor is literally showing his hand saying, "Do we deserve forgiveness?" This guy's a politician. He probably doesn't deserve it, but most normal people do. Just kick him out. Shannon then says he's angry at Connor as there were casualties, and he's out. So another nightmare later, Shannon then heads downstairs for breakfast as he offers to take Killian to school. It's around this time that General Turd Ferguson shows up to check in on how things are going. He says it's brave of her to take one back in. See that, subtle, dehumanizing talk? It shows you're a tool. The general then drops off confidential documents and at this point shows Shannon was with Connor. How did they get this picture? It makes no sense in reality. So Abby at this point goes to where the cured are, sort of doing all their meetings, and discovers they all like to bunch up in a strange way and breathe heavily. Kind of like they're all connected, and this hints at something within the brain. While it is a leftover trait, the scent the cured produce seem to induce a state of calm in those who were previously infected. Because of this, we can assume the functionality of the brain has been permanently changed. This holdover function is almost comparable to an adult cat kneading. While this is a trait left over from a kitten, it still exists to calm them. Same for the scent of the other infected. Connor is giving a speech about how it's their country too and they don't deserve to be treated this way, which arguably he is correct. But he's just a politician though, so negative 1,000 cool points. As Connor talks to Abby, he says they had no choice but to use concussive blast detonations. Maybe, I don't know. It's gotta be a better way than doing that. But Abby says she knows they operate like a pack as she starts getting chased by the group, but is able to make it out before they drag her back in. And also Connor says she would have never known that they operate like a pack. Basically, Shannon would have never told her that. So he's like, how did you get that information? So it appears the infected do have a higher social bonding method, but the question from here is, what is that? Well, again, it all goes back to their sense of smell. While, as mentioned, not the strongest scent we have, it is massively tied to memory. I dated a woman back when I was 16, and she was 16 as well, so it wasn't a weird thing. She wasn't way older than me, but she wore a particular perfume. I hadn't thought about her in years, not even a blip on my radar, but I walked past someone the other day who had the same kind of perfume that she was wearing, and I had a Ratatouille chef tasting their childhood moment of memories. If we can assume that the cured use this scent or this type of scent bonds them, then it should be no surprise to you that, with the amygdala, ventromedial frontal cortices, and right somatosensory cortex involved in human sociability, in conjunction with how close it is to the olfactory bulb, that this is kind of what's causing this very close social relationship and the loyalty seen within. This would seem to suggest that the scent of the cured and the infected alike would bond them due to the bleed over of neuron communication during their infection. So while this is going on, the resistant are starting to be taken out as the one the doctor was working on randomly sits back up, which was strange behavior. Calling out to her, she appears to be changing, becoming more calm, but as the doctor reaches out her hand, she begins to attack, showing, she's not calm. The doctor then yells about how, I can save her! Maybe. The medication they use on the standard person works by rebuilding neurons. These neurons, once coming back online, would seem to help stabilize the brain and its operations, which is necessary for getting the person out of their psychosis. With their main goal being neuronal repair and achieving this, it shows how this process works. When a person is infected, the toxins go to work first. From here, this begins to starve the brain of its oxygen and then lead to brain damage. The infection itself also begins to flourish in the body, likely using the nervous system as a breeding ground, creating more issues by killing off neurons. This allows for a person to transmit the infection through their saliva, much like how animals would transmit rabies. The virus and toxins are injected through a bite, and as time passes, I believe there is a fundamental shift. Likely the maize virus is a DNA virus. Instead of it just hijacking cellular function to create more of itself and then exploding the cell, it would implant into the DNA of a person where it will permanently remain. This is actually an incredibly common issue, with 8% of the human genome hypothesized to be really old viruses. Ancient viruses, one would say. launching natural killer T cells, macrophages, and antibodies, eventually the maze virus would be overcome by natural processes of the body. As the viral load decreases in your bloodstream, it doesn't appear as though the virus goes away completely or just goes completely dormant, but instead, low levels are released into your body, sort of like how HIV can become undetectable, but it's still in your bloodstream, just not at a level that can cause issues. As your body keeps immune system activity to continue fighting this invader, basically, you would produce a scent identifying you as already infected. Eventually, what is left is a person with the infection being at such low levels that their body can manage it, as it will not inspire the detrimental symptoms seen in those initially infected. However, due to the initial rise of the infection and the issues that brought, the brain damage is still prevalent, and they are still in a psychotic and violent event. Along with this, the low levels of the maze virus in their bodies allows for it to still be passed along, which that means, again, those two that were trying to hook up with a zombie, what are you doing? So once the neurons are repaired in the brain, likely using the medication that reactivates the mitotic genes in neurons, which currently we don't really know how to do, a person would have their brain repair itself. This is for the cured, however. With the resistant, I see another issue. Given the fact that the medication can work, it just appears to take longer than it should, it would appear that another medication is likely being given as well. Antiviral medication may be needed along with a dosage of neural repair to help the body overcome the initial infection. For some, the virus may be able to flourish in their bodies better than with others through genetic mutations in their own bodies that make them potentially less fit at dealing with this infection. Because of this, their brain damage may be more extensive and their viral load in their bodies may be higher, which means once they're given the cure, it doesn't work as quickly as with others. As this infection progresses in those who are resistant, you might need to bring down the viral load first to help the immune system before repairing the brain. Otherwise, you are giving the virus more tissue to grow in, increasing the viral load, which in turn erases the work of trying to grow the neurons in the first place as they are destroyed. So because of this, likely helicase primase inhibitors would be given along with brain growth medications that would stop the virus from being able to destroy the tissue. It may be at this point that the body, once getting the virus to low enough levels that it could handle, would be good to go. But prior, the fight was too long and too drug out for the body to kind of contend with, and it was too depleted to adequately keep fighting the infection. However, once brought down to manageable levels, the body is able to recover, and this would add the resistance to the ranks of the cured. So as Killian face paints Shannon's face, Abby watches the footage from earlier. Shannon begins having flashbacks to how cats headbutt each other to show affection, as Abby's house is about to be overwhelmed by angry neighbors. Shannon comes outside with her and then goes to watch the face paint off, and then starts talking with Abby. They have a nice laugh as she tells Shannon she's happy he's here. Are you though? The squad then breaks in, calling him scum, and knocks him out. The next day, the cops show up and are about as useful as cops showing up and investigating something. Remember, you are your first line of defense during any home invasion. Stay strapped or get clapped. Cops are there to zip up a body bag in a lot of cases. So, Abby is pretty upset as she calls about the general to warn them about Connor. The cured are now meeting up with the doctor, and she wants in on the destruction because of the way that the government is acting. Shannon tries to tell them to calm down and eat some fruit, which is what my little sister told me the other day, and it made me laugh, but they aren't having it. As they wrap up their meeting, the building is being raided by the military. Over at the park, we see a really weird sign saying, "I have the maze virus. I'm small, but I can still make you sick." This supports the idea that the virus is in fact still in the bodies of those infected even when they're cured. It notes that people can still get sick from the younglings playing there, and if they were previously infected and cured, it really doesn't matter. Abby and Killian are hanging out, and I'm assuming the offspring may have been infected, but I watched the whole movie, and I'm gonna go ahead and say, no, he wasn't, but he's playing at the park. Connor once again then shows up. Bro, go away. He grabs Abby's hand, but she's pretty cringed out by it. He tries to explain himself, and also, fellas, if you grab a woman's hand and she has the whole, tight jaw, the raised nose, no eye contact, it's usually a sign of disgust. You might want to let go of her hand. So at this point, Connor spills the spaghetti out of his pocket, asking Abby to ask Shannon what he remembers about his time as a zombie. The general now wakes up Shannon asking what Connor is planning. The general says that, "I can help you, Shannon, but you have to tell me, and also my time is up apparently, and I can't talk to you anymore." So now the Cured Alliance is trying to get in contact with Shannon. As he heads home, Abby is like, "Okay, listen dude, what happened to Luke?" Well, Shannon tells her, and that goes over about as well as crapping your pants on a roller coaster. So she's upset now, asking how he could even be here if you took out Luke. I mean, you do have to move on with your life, right? And where else is the dude gonna go? And also, isn't this technically his house? So as Connor smells Shannon's head, as one does, but see olfactory bulb interaction activating pathways associated with loyalty and sociability, he hugs him. And now we are at some sort of dock or abandoned building. where it's all gonna go down exactly as planned. Connor comes out of the darkness like a weirdo saying, "Oi, blimey, mate, they're all the same, isn't it?" This is exactly what he did, as Shannon asks if Connor still has nightmares, and he's like, "Why should I? It's Tuesday, smashing day for a pint. I hadn't had a nightmare in ever." Well, he is a politician, so I'm going to go ahead and guess that's probably just par for the course. The general arrives and puts a barrel against Connor's head, which is stupid as the dude now knows where you are, and then the general orders Connor to cuff himself, as Connor then goes common Londoner on the general, which, here's a question. Why did the general show up alone? Where was his team? And why are they only, like, you hear the police sirens, why are they only just now showing up? Why would you do any of this? So Shannon says he couldn't go through with the attack because people were going to get hurt, and General Mayhem's reign has come to an end as Shannon shows up for work the next day. They start taking out guards like left, right, and center at this point. Shannon descends down into the holding cells for the resistant to look for the doctor, but instead, they end up opening all the cells when the doctor goes to open one. It's called being a useful idiot, doctor. Congratulations. So with the infected released, this means they will now run around and take out all the non-infected, but the cured will be perfectly fine, but not without a fight. The military starts opening up on them, freaking out as the resistant ones and the cured ones detonate a vehicle and open the gate. Meanwhile, one of the resistants appears to have been actively cured as she waits in her room. It's the one the doctor was working on. With a full-scale breakout currently happening, it's pure chaos. The doctor then goes to sit with Joanna as she is now officially cured a resistant person. Her body was allowed to recover, her immune cells were replenished, and her psychosis has ended. She kisses her, probably would have given that maybe like half a second more, and tested for the presence of the virus in the saliva, but the doctor is then torn apart by another infected in front of Joanna. Bummer, dude. Like, hopefully she categorized her work. Abby now hears the growls outside as she goes out with an axe rather than doing the smart thing and just shutting your door, and starts stacking bodies. The military shows up to grab her as Shannon starts running towards the military as they open up. Bold strategy. Connor then walks around and starts mind melding with the infected as they start getting taken out as the military is dealing with the same issue. Shannon goes to try to find Killian at this point, with Connor continuing to be a total weirdo about everything. Shannon makes a break for it as Connor finally tracks him down. One of the infected holds Shannon down, oddly enough, as Connor smacks him in the head with a pipe, and Killian runs off being chased. With the knowledge that the infected can be used to attack, it would seem that the cured can direct, and with that, since Connor has used his scent to calm the newly infected, he now has influence over them, which is probably why he got voted leader of the Cured Alliance also. Maybe Connor's just an alpha Chad, I don't know. Well, he's not an alpha Chad in the fact that he's cool, he's just an alpha Chad to infected. Eventually, Shannon is able to get up, but Connor starts attacking him, looking like he's completely infected as a soldier takes a shot at him, ending this man's whole political career. Shannon is able to catch up to Killian and then take out the infected that was chasing him, but unfortunately, Connor is back up in action at this point as, obviously Shannon finds the blood trail. Over at Checkpoint Charlie, people are being let through to escape the town as Abby takes a stomach punch for some reason, ouchies, as she nopes out there towards the stairs. Getting to higher ground, she comes out on a road and finds a guard that has been eaten and infected are roaming around. She's able to take them out, but everyone around her is beginning to change. That noise when she pot shot at that guard would 100% televise your location. As Joe the Resistant is now cured walks along, Abby returns home looking for Killian. Shannon brings him home as another infected breaks in and then Killian is infected. Ha! Friggin' nice, dude. Like, how do y'all not hear these people in the house? Shannon says that she doesn't have to take out Killian as there's a cure, so she decides not to take him out as he takes Killian and then runs off so he won't attack anyone else. Abby has a nice cry on the stairs as Shannon heads for what I imagine should be the compound he works in. Been on the news, more information about how the cured are around, but the outbreak was quelled much faster around this time, probably because it's harder for like a disease to spread in those who are already immune. Shannon keeps walking with Killian to get to a cure, and that's that, Mrs. That's That. The Maze virus is from all accounts appearing to be a DNA virus. Upon inserting itself into the genetic coding of a human, it will permanently release a small amount of itself, as is normal with DNA viruses, which the body will quell, but it will permanently make a person immune to reinfection. Also because their immune system will now be able to recognize this type of virus. But after their initial infection, like with any other disease, the first time is the worst. This is sort of like why if you got cowpox, smallpox wasn't as bad if you somewhat contracted it or got exposed to it. Brain damage would begin to build up, causing the person to enter a state of psychosis as they became violent and spread the virus further. And also, I don't know if I actually explained the cowpox thing. Back in the day, they would infect people with cowpox so that they didn't catch smallpox, or the smallpox wasn't as bad, and cowpox itself wasn't as bad either. Whereas if you caught smallpox, you would probably get bodied. So the cure would clearly require building of neural tissue, and in those who cannot overcome the virus by themselves, this would require an antiviral medication intervention in order to give their immune system the best chance. Also, Connor sucks. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think it was a DNA virus? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then please leave a like as it gets the video out there, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on what I post. I'll drop merch, Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and channel link to Roanoke Tales, where this week we are talking about the disappearance of Tara Calico. Very strange event. Also, the sheriff there may be at fault. Not really sure. Allegedly. Anyhow, speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer. Thank you, bro. Next up, our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations B-grade horror movies, Dakota23, Florian, Lucian Dragon, Octavia, Serpentia, and the last final girl on the left. Thank you guys as well. And to the rest of my patrons, I appreciate you. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running, and you are ballers. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. See y'all in the next one.